This episode of Bullet Heaven was made using Pack-a-Punch SCART cables from Retro Gaming Cables, the OSSC from Video Game Perfection, and the Retrobit 2.5 GHz Wireless Saturn controller from STONEAGE Gamer. In episode 16, wow, episode 16, it sure has been a while, huh? Anyway, in episode 16 of Bullet Heaven, we took a look at Thunder Force 5 Perfect System for the original PlayStation. As the first in the series to use 3D polygons and background elements alongside extensive 2D sprite work, Thunder Force 5 Perfect System did a great job of keeping the feel of the original Genesis and Mega Drive titles. But Perfect System is not the first version of this game, nor was it the best. Thunder Force 5 was originally released on the Sega Saturn in 1997 by Technosoft. While Perfect System did make certain improvements to the game with regards to performance and visual effects, the Saturn version is generally regarded as the best way to play this pretty great shooter. So let's take a closer look. We've taken a good look at several Thunder Force games on Bullet Heaven over the years, and Thunder Force 5 maintains the kind of gameplay excellence that is expected of the series. To start, players select the order of the first 3 stages they'll take on. This is reminiscent of Thunder Force 4, but starting in Stage 4, the game will flow exactly the same every time. Players move their ship, known as the Gauntlet, around the screen with the same typical 8-way control as is expected of a game such as this. The player will have access to 2 permanent weapons, the forward-firing twin shot and the rear-firing back shot. By default, these weapons are fired with the B button and selected in a counterclockwise manner with the C button. Players can also add an additional input in the options menu to cycle their weapons in the opposite direction if needed. In addition to the default loadout, additional weapons can be collected by releasing them from carrier ships. Wave, which can blast through physical obstacles and barriers. Hunter, which tracks down and homes in on enemies anywhere on the screen. And the fan-favorite free-range laser, which can be aimed by flying in the opposite direction the player wants to fire. Free range in specific seems to be more powerful than the rest, not just because it can be fired in any direction, but even more so since its power increases at closer range. These extra weapons fill a matrix made up of hexagons in the top left-hand corner of the screen. Unlike the other Thunder Force games before it, the twin shot and rear shot have no enhanced versions, but there's a reason for this. Thunder Force 5 is the first game in the series in which all of the weapons at the player's disposal also have a more powerful secondary fire, which is activated with the A button by default. This overdriven secondary mode can only be accessed once the player collects the series trademark craw bits, which will orbit the player's ship. Up to 3 can be held at a time. The craw will also increase the player's weapon level when more than 1 are collected. And it goes even further. The craw can also absorb enemy attacks, adding a layer of defense to the player's ship. Care should be taken though. If the craw's energy has been depleted, it can be destroyed, reducing the player's defensive and offensive capabilities. Thankfully, the player can also collect a dedicated shield pickup, which enables an attack-absorbing barrier to help players in the event that they get totally overwhelmed by fire. If the player ends up biting it though, their surviving craws will be ejected to be collected again, and any non-permanent weapon in use at the time will be lost. It is possible, as with other Thunder Force games, to switch out to a less useful or permanent weapon if players know they're going to eat death, though this technique takes seriously fast reflexes. Speaking of the quickness, the movement rate here is also pretty snappy, and the player can change the speed of their ship from 50% to 75% to 100%, then back to 50% by pressing the Y button by default. But, like Thunder Force 4, and as we saw in Perfect System, players can also really dial in exactly how much speed they want by holding down the speed change button. This will increase the player's speed percentile by percentile over the time it is held. Additionally, players can also choose how fast their ship moves at game start in the options menu. Better still, both weapon selection and speed selection can be done while the game is paused. While the normal control scheme for Thunder Force 5 is alright, it also features an excellent direct control scheme where each button on the Saturn controller is linked to a dedicated weapon. By default, A fires the double shot, B the rear shot, C the wave cannon, X the free range laser, and Y the hunter shot. Z changes the player's speed, and the R button overdrives the player's weapon. In Perfect System, this was called Advanced Control, but the PlayStation controller feels much more unnatural for this style of play thanks to having to use the shoulder buttons for some attacks. But on the Saturn, this setup is pretty incredible, allowing players to efficiently select and use the weapon they need without fumbling around the weapon matrix. Of course, all of the inputs in Thunder Force 5 are totally customizable, so players can rebind all of the functions into a setup that works best for them. Thunder Force 5 plays over the course of 7 stages, each lasting a moderate amount of time and packed with challenging enemy waves, topped off with intense boss encounters. Better still, players will also take control of a new ship, the Vambrace, starting on stage 5. The Vambrace changes up the player's default weapons, which includes Thunder Force 4's blade weapon, and even docks with a hyper-powerful armored shell called the Brigandine that can basically erase any enemy in almost no time at all. The Brigandine is absurdly powerful, and it has its own armor gauge that allows players to sustain several hits. However, it'll be permanently destroyed when the blue gauge displaying alongside the player is reduced to 0. While the difficulty on normal and above can be pretty intense for newcomers, playing on easy can give the player a good idea of where enemy waves exist and how the mid and stage end bosses behave, allowing for a better understanding of how to take the game on in a harder setting. With a bit of practice, decent progress can definitely be made regardless of setting. By contrast, the Working Designs version of Perfect System released in North America cut the game's stages down in number when playing on easy, preventing players from actually completing it. And at that point, they might as well have just removed it entirely. With this in mind, the Saturn version is actually a very fair game. All told, and while it definitely has its share of difficulty spikes, it still comes off as the least difficult Thunder Force game outside of Thunder Spirits on the Super NES. Of course, there are a few issues to contend with here. Most notably, there is a bit more slowdown here than in the PlayStation version of the game, given certain limitations the Saturn exhibits with 3D heavy games in general. But for the vast majority of the game, Thunder Force 5 on Saturn still runs extremely well where it counts, and it feels great with regards to control response time. We have other minor complaints, but those will be discussed later on. Of course, being the first version of this game, Thunder Force 5 on Saturn also obviously lacks some of the features found in Perfect System. For example, the hidden alternate gauntlet ships usable in the first 4 stages were made specifically for Perfect System, so naturally they're not present here. Extra game modes were also added to Perfect System which are not found in the Saturn version, such as Boss Rush. When the chips are down though, we'd still say that Thunder Force 5 on Saturn is more fun than on PlayStation despite a simpler feature set. The direct control scheme works extremely well with the Saturn's 6-button setup, something players need a specialized controller for on PlayStation. Of course, while the gameplay is fun on its own, players looking to take things in a more score-oriented direction can do so. Like Perfect System, vanilla Thunder Force 5 also features a very familiar scoring system. Players looking to boost their score in Thunder Force 5 can do so fairly easily. This game employs a very similar scoring system to that of the Raiden series. A lot of enemies will simply add points to the player's score, but larger enemies, mid-bosses, and stage-end bosses can award multiplied scores based on how fast they are killed off to a maximum of 16 times. Enemies that will award multiplied scores will display a crosshair which has an indicator that moves in a clockwise fashion. The earlier in the cycle the player can destroy the enemy, the higher the bonus. After one full rotation though, the bonus is null and void. That's not the only way players can boost their scores though. Collecting duplicate weapons and extra craws while at full capacity and power will award a cool 10,000 points apiece. Combining these bonuses with multiplied scores will allow players to easily hit the all-important extend scores, allowing for quite a few extra lives fairly quickly. Add to that dedicated 1-up drops in certain parts of the game and players should have a pretty healthy life stock for the harder mid and endgame stages. Another subtle feature is how the score changes from yellow to red when a new personal best is achieved. It takes the guesswork out of whether the score has been beaten, especially in those too close to call situations many high score chasers can sometimes face. So the scoring system here is simple but effective. Of course, being a Saturn game, there are no online leaderboards here, but player ranking by difficulty is still able to be saved to the Saturn's internal or cartridge memory. It also allows for players to enter 8 characters, which works well for my typical username. Nice! Thunder Force 5 on the Saturn has very strong and very weak elements to its presentation, but the general consensus is that the Saturn version beats the PlayStation version in most respects, despite the PlayStation's technological advantages. Visually, Thunder Force 5 has never been the belle of the ball. Low poly counts, chunky textures, and jittering models make for a slightly jarring time. The Saturn version also has its own unique issues too. Like many Saturn games, Thunder Force 5 is light on transparencies, with stippling used in places to approximate an additional transparent effect. This works fine on a CRT, but with today's monitors it looks less than great, so in this respect Perfect System gets a thumbs up, but really only in this one respect. Otherwise, the Saturn version really nails it. It features all kinds of subtle but noticeable atmospheric effects that aren't found in Perfect System at all. And the backgrounds often boast great transparency. In addition to the richer backgrounds, better element distribution, and design, one very noticeable omission on the PlayStation sticks out from the rest: an incredible visual depth to the human road stage. This is one of the coolest stages in the series, bar none, and we'll take this over extra transparencies any day, especially since Perfect System only has a flat, basic warping texture here instead. Bleh. Meanwhile, the sound in Thunder Force 5 between Saturn and Perfect System can sometimes be divisive, but we'll just put this out there. Thunder Force 5 on Saturn sounds better than the PlayStation version to us. The compositions are the same, but there's a certain layer of something that the Saturn version here that makes it sound more genuine. All of Tsukumo's soundtracks on the Saturn, from Hyperduel to Blastwind, had this same subtle quality, and it's more pronounced here than in Thunder Force 5 on PSX. The sound effects are better here too, with many changed to something less fitting on the PlayStation. They definitely still work on PSX, and maybe they're better mixed, but they're more fitting on the Saturn. Another neat feature to Thunder Force 5 is the layout of the weapon matrix. Players can change its layout in the option menu, though the weapons players collect will fill it in the same general order. The Saturn version also features a simple opening movie. It gets right to the point and respects the player's time, damn it! While the added story elements and exposition make the PlayStation's opening movie more cinematic, we could take it or leave it. The PlayStation version also got an image gallery added to it, but heavy meh, the gameplay here is the real star anyway. So how does Thunder Force 5 on the Saturn stack up? Let's take a look. Thunder Force 5 features the same great control and fine-tuned movement speed options as Thunder Force 4, but the added direct control scheme really takes it to another level. Thunder Force 5 allows for players to build up to a normal 1cc in ways no other Thunder Force before allowed. By contrast though, Perfect System in North America gives players only half a game when playing below normal difficulty. Thunder Force 5 on Saturn may not have the same amount of game modes as the later Perfect System, but having the whole game available over all difficulties gives players, especially new ones, more incentive to replay the game. While the visuals in Thunder Force 5 have never been especially great, the backgrounds and atmospherics here are insane, especially compared to Perfect System. The sound is also a cut above Perfect System, with a richer, more authentic rendition of Tsukumo's soundtrack and more fitting effects across the board. As far as ingenuity goes, the incredible direct control scheme takes the Thunder Force formula to new heights, while incorporating new overdrive and craw mechanics. The shift to a new ship midway through keeps the game feeling pretty fresh as well. The Saturn version of Thunder Force 5 is pretty affordable compared to a lot of other shooters on the platform, though this still means it weighs in at well over $100. A special pack with a soundtrack CD can also be found at auction, though it is considerably more expensive. Of course, spineless copies can save players almost $100 in some cases, so you know. Thunder Force 5 definitely deserved another go on Bullet Heaven, given that our previous review was made so long ago. We think that playing the Saturn version for this review was the right choice. It was definitely an eye-opener, and we absolutely recommend it over the PSX version. We may still try to get the Japanese PlayStation release to see what working designs ended up changing, but one thing is for certain, it's still not going to top the Saturn release. Thunder Force 5 gets a 4.75 out of 5. It's getting pretty pricey, but Thunder Force 5 can be found at auction fairly easily. We want to revisit more older episodes with the modern deep dive format and better capture, so what game from Bullet Heaven's Halcyon days would you like to see covered again? Let us know below. Also, remember Project Starship? It turns out a follow-up is being released, and we're going to give it a solid go. Project Starship X is up for review on the next episode of Bullet Heaven.
Be sure to like, comment, and of course, subscribe. We finally got a copy of Hyperduel for the Sega Saturn, and we'll be reviewing it once we hit 10,000 subscribers.